All right, welcome back to Biology 10. I'm moving on with chapter 17.2, looking at the ideas that influenced Darwin. So I'm actually going to break this section up into two parts. Today we're just going to cover the conclusions that Hutton and Lyell drew about Earth's history, and then describe Lamarck's hypothesis of evolution, because there was several other people that had the idea that species can change over time. But all of theirs were a little bit flawed, or maybe didn't have a mechanism as to how it happened. And Darwin kind of did a really good job gathering evidence to support his idea. So, ideas that influenced Darwin. All right. So you have to think about, at the time, we're talking about the 1800s here, the current belief was that Earth was only a few thousand years old. And the reason for that is because, people were, they were really religious. And they believed everything that the Bible says, and that's great. God, I don't want to cause a controversy here, but the current belief at that time was that Earth was only a few thousand years old. Because, that's what it said in the Bible. And that Earth had not changed, because if it was created by God, then it is perfect. Okay? And why should things change if it's perfect? So I just want to get you into that mindset, okay? And okay. Anyways, Hutton and Lyell were both geologists that kind of studied the rocks and looked at processes that changed Earth, and they concluded that Earth is actually really extremely old. And that the processes that we see today are the same processes that operate in the past. So plate tectonics, even though they didn't know what plate tectonics was at the time, or weathering and erosion, volcanoes, earthquakes. So these two kind of responsible for basically saying, hey, Earth is actually really old, and it does change. So Hutton and geological change, he noticed that there was a connection between geological processes and the features. He looked at a lot of rock strata, mountains, how did they form, valleys, layers of rocks, and how they were maybe bent or folded in some way. And he's like, what's going on here? Certain rocks are made from molten lava or even sediments, like sedimentary rocks, if you think back to 8th grade. And so he proposed that there were forces underneath Earth that caused all of these features, and that Earth can change and does change. Lyell wrote a book in 1830, The Principles of Geology, and his big banner, or what he really believed in, was uniformitarianism, how the geological processes seen today are the same that shaped Earth millions of years ago. And this is actually one of the books that Darwin read on his 5-year voyage. And Darwin actually witnessed the Earth changing before his eyes. He saw volcanoes erupting, and actually was in an earthquake where the ground was uplifted by several feet. So he actually saw Earth change in front of him. And his thought idea was, if Earth can change through time, could life change too? Darwin was just a man of questions. He was always asking questions. So uniformitarianism, it says right here, rock strata, which is the layers that you see, demonstrate that geological processes which are still occurring today add up over long periods of time to cause great change. And you can see that there's a lot of changes here. Okay, this diagram right here is Mount Everest, and there's actually marine fossils at the top of Mount Everest. And that's because, how did Mount Everest form? Well, two plates colliding with each other forming a mountain. And so both of those plates were, at the bottom of below sea level, hosted marine life, and it got uplifted when those plates collided, and now we have found marine fossils in very, very high elevations. Okay, so I want to talk about a guy named Jean-Baptiste Lamarck and his theory of evolution. It isn't quite true, although if you were to Google his name right now, there are people that are actually giving him credit. He wasn't entirely wrong. But he suggested that animals or organisms could change over time during their lifetimes by just selectively using or not using parts of their bodies. So I'm going to give you a few examples, and you're probably going to chuckle or laugh. But he also suggested that these traits or these changes or omissions or whatever parts of their bodies could be passed on to their offspring. So these traits that I'm talking about are things that that were acquired during that organism's life, and as a result, species can change over time. So to give you a funny example, let's say that I'm like this super ripped bodybuilder. I mean, I'm like super ripped, like super muscular, and I'm like, basically Miss Universe. Does that mean that my daughter or my son are going to be super ripped and have all these gigantic muscles because I did? No, that's an acquired trait. That's something I picked up during my lifetime. It is not heritable. It cannot be passed on to my offspring. Okay, so that's what it means by acquired traits. So a couple of examples. Your book talks about flamingos, which is a new example I have never come across. But the reason why flamingos have long legs is because they just simply waded in deeper waters and their legs grew. Funny, right? I don't know. Giraffes. Giraffes have long necks because they stretch to reach their tall leaves. So, their necks could stretch during their lifetime, and that means they can pass on this long neck trait to their offspring. Yeah, okay. Here's a comic strip. Let's just dumb it down a little bit. Stretch, stretch, think about the children. Ah! Okay, so this is actually called Lamarck's inheritance of acquired traits. Okay, if you see the word characteristics, that means the same thing as traits. And basically 3 statements. All organisms have this inborn urge to become more complex and perfect. Second statement. Acquired features help them live more successfully in their environment. And the third one, organisms could change the size as well as the shape or whatever, vice versa, of organs by using their bodies in different ways. So like the flamingos, well, they waded in deeper water, their legs grew. The giraffes, they're stretching their necks, so they get longer necks, and then they can pass that on to their offspring. So Lamarck's inheritance of acquired traits. However, there's some flaws with that. Okay, number 1, organisms do not have an inborn urge to become perfect. Okay, not every organism is perfect. There are flaws. Evolution does not make species become better over time. Sometimes it makes them worse. Evolution is not determined or in this predetermined direction. It's not linear. It just kind of depends on the environment. And then finally, traits acquired by individuals over time are not inherited by those offspring. So again, if I'm like Miss Universe, doesn't mean my daughter is going to be Miss Universe. So yeah. Okay, so that is Lamarck's hypotheses, inheritance of acquired traits, and we also talked about Lyell and Hunton and their kind of contribution to Darwin's ideas of evolution. I know we haven't really gotten to his ideas yet, but at least you know that Hunton and Lyell are all about Earth's history, and Lamarck's hypothesis kind of deals with, hey, you can gain these traits in your lifetime and pass them on to your offspring, which is not entirely true. So we'll continue on tomorrow with Malthus's view of population growth and talk a little bit about artificial selection.